Hello everybody, Stevie again. Welcome to my final video number 3 in the short video series on suicide. And this is video 3, Suicide, Saving Lives and Restoring Hope. And the word restoring hope is very powerful, because I think that's what we're all trying to do. Deep down in our soul, we're all trying to restore hope for the future and the hope for our children, our families, that we don't get tangled up in this issue of people wanting to commit suicide. So hopefully the information I've provided in these videos will give people hope and give people more education and awareness, and some little tricks and understanding what you can do to identify the symptoms and the triggers, to make sure that doesn't happen. In the final video, I want to talk about the call to action. I mean, what can we really do to raise awareness and raise more education on the subject? And I spoke about the reality check in the first video when I presented some of the global statistics from the World Health Organization, and how up to 800,000 people are committing suicide each year, and how the 16 to 29-year-old demographic and the 60 age group onwards are all in the same position where that suicide rate's becoming high. And I think it's very alarming and disturbing to think that it could happen to you, it could happen to your family, it could happen to someone you know. And I'm sure we've all got a story to tell, an experience to talk about. But I think there needs to be more action taken, and there are some limitations around suicide. I spoke about in the second video about the issue of stigma, the issue being a taboo subject. Not many people either want to talk about it or they don't know how to talk about it. And I think that's a sad state of affairs to be in. And we look at the major symptoms, the major triggers, and we look at some of the expert opinions saying that we should start looking a bit more deeper, we should start thinking a bit more outside the box, and it's time for change, because the suicide rates haven't changed that much in 100 years, so the statistics are telling us that something's wrong. And I think that's an important eye-opener for many people, because everyone's so busy looking after themselves, their own lives, their own families, their own work, their careers, and we get pigeonholed. We can't see that these things are actually happening around us. So I wanted to raise the question, how can we achieve this? How can we achieve progression? How can we achieve a reduction in the rates of suicide? And because when you look at the World Health Organization, their mental health plan for the year 2013 to 2020 was basically to reduce suicide rates by 10% around the world in each country. And I'm not sure whether that's ever going to be achieved, because even some of the subject experts I've mentioned throughout a couple of videos have stated that things are getting worse. So how can we raise more awareness? How can we raise more education? How can we inform people a bit more about the seriousness? How can we get people to talk a bit more about the suicidal issues? And how can we get people to respond? And that's one of the big picture type items I wanted to just touch base on in this final video. And I think it needs to come from the high-end governments, even the media, and the educational institutions. I think it's all about trying to dovetail together these powerful institutions that have the power to change, the power to inform, the power to educate, and they have the resources, and lots of people say we can ask for resources, but we don't tend to get them. And one of the major findings I found from comments, from some of the researchers I found, was that we need to start taking little steps. We need to start pushing forward at the grassroots level and getting people like myself, someone you know close to you, your work colleagues, you know, to have some input at the grassroots community level, so that people start to get, at least try and get the train engine moving, you know. And I think once you get that train engine moving, it's going to be very difficult to stop it. Because if we rely on the engine driver and we rely on the government and the policymakers, it's going to take too long, and this issue is still prevalent. So it has to be a combined effort, and I think that's how we can raise the awareness, is by talking a bit more about the subject and opening up communication channels, so things are allowed to happen and things are allowed to be spoken about, and it doesn't become a taboo subject. It might take time, but we need to start somewhere. The media is very powerful. I think the media can have some massive impact here, and I think the media needs to also be responsible in how it reports suicide into the community. What about the good things that are happening? Do we ever really hear too much about that? Where I reside in Perth in Australia, there's some fantastic institutions who have set up, you know, support systems and campaigns and programs to help raise that awareness and educate people on some of these issues that are considering as triggers for suicide, but also what people can do to try and prevent it. And these campaigns, such as, you know, Are You OK campaign, just by asking questions to your fellow colleague at work, are you okay, is a very important step in moving forward with this issue of suicide. And I'm very humble to think that people can do that, you know. I think that's where we don't understand the power of the community, the power of the individual to make that initial change. Some of the researchers also spoke about the need for mental health screening and risk profiling. In other words, Professor Matthew Knox spoke about some of the research he's done in the USA in regards to analysing medical records and putting these formulas into systems, computer systems, to spit out a risk profile in regards to, well, this person may be at risk of suicide in a few years' time, and is having some success with that. And I think that's what's important, is that these types of experts get involved and take new approaches, because the whole gambit of this video series, that we do need to take a new approach. We can't rest on our morals. We can't rest on the fact that people are just need to know that suicide exists and it shouldn't be spoken about. And we're trying our best to do things. We need a bit more power. We need a bit more enthusiasm, motivation to make the changes at the grassroots level. And taking those little steps are very important. Like myself doing this video has taken a step forward. Someone else might listen to it and share it with someone else. And I think we need to take some responsibility, because we all have families who are potentially vulnerable. I think there needs to be more evidence-based interventions and provide more resources in schools and educational institutions, even prisons and hospitals and work environments, community centres, and more trained counsellors in suicide, people who can, you know, pass on their experience or pass on their ability to get people to open up and to listen and to talk a bit more. And this open communication model is very, very important when it comes to suicide. But I do believe parents and families need to also take some more responsibility to notice some of the signals, to be aware of what's happening to their siblings and their spouses and their friends. Because many people who commit suicide come across with a happy persona before they pursue the event. and it's sometimes hard to distinguish whether there's a problem, but deep down emotionally they're hurting, and we often see from the research that relationship problems are a core driver in many instances. Substance abuse, or there's been a crisis event maybe within a period of weeks or months before that's triggering them to think this way. And we need to consider these underlying under ocean iceberg effects, because we can only see the tip of the iceberg, but under the water there's lots of things festering. And I think relationship issues are a major driver. In fact, some researchers talk about suicide being a relationship disease, where there's been problems with relationships, there's been a breakdown, or it might be a divorce, or a breakup, or someone's left the family, someone's not speaking anymore, whatever it might be. There's this little inner seed being planted, grows into a bit of an oak tree in regards to the effects it can have on the person's mind. So encouraging people to talk is very important, and I want to close with a very profound statement from Harvard Professor Matthew Nock, who talks candidly about suicide. He's an expert, and he knows about self-harm, and he knows about the reasons. But he also says there's a misconception out there that people think if they start talking about suicide, and you ask someone how they're going, are they feeling okay, that it might actually lead the person onto suicide or lead them onto thinking about it. And it's this cautious approach that he basically says should not occur, because it doesn't lead people on to take an action. And I want to leave you with the quote of Matthew Nock, because he says, if you feel that someone might be at risk for suicide or self-injury, ask them, and then ask them if they're feeling sad. Ask them if they're feeling depressed, and ask them if they're thinking about suicide. And if you get an answer of yes, or I was thinking about it, then take them to someone who can help them. So I take my hat off to Professor Matthew Nock, because he's right. It's the question that's very important. Some people see these things happening, they have an intuition that there's something wrong, but they don't take the first step, that little step forward, by saying, are you okay? Or asking them if they feel sad, or asking them if they feel depressed, or ask them if they're feeling about committing suicide. So on that note, I'd like to leave you with the hope that you've got something from these video series, and hopefully you'll be a bit more cautious, a bit more aware, and a bit more educated in regards to the issue of suicide, but also what you can do to go about it, because it's you, it's me, and it's your fellow friend, colleague, family member who can make a huge difference by asking the question and getting support for the person. So on that note, I hope you can tune into my videos in the future, and be aware and be more observant of what's going on. And thank you for tuning in. And God bless. Thank you.